Environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, disclosures used to be public relations accessories. Today, they form foundational market infrastructure that directly shapes how capital, insurance, and procurement contracts are allocated. Corporations and standard setters are spending millions to converge on global reporting templates like the IFRS and ISSB. The IFRS and ISSB are global baseline standards designed to make sustainability-related financial disclosures consistent and comparable across different jurisdictions. But this semantic alignment does not guarantee operational reliability. Standardized reporting headings strictly dictate what a corporation is supposed to say about its sustainability. The reporting template has a massive blind spot. It does not dictate what actually happens when the information filled into those headings is discovered to be materially false or misleading. Relying solely on a converged reporting standard creates a template illusion. It gives counterparties a false sense of security, blinding them to the actual, unmitigated risks of greenwashing. To evaluate whether an ESG claim is actually trustworthy, we have to separate the vague idea of truth into three precise, measurable properties. The first is verifiability. This is an epistemic property. It asks the baseline question of whether a specific claim can actually be checked using existing evidence, data, and methods. The second is reliability. This is a decision property. It determines whether a user is justified in trusting that claim, given the inherent uncertainty and the preparer's incentives. The third is credibility. This is an institutional property. It relies entirely on the surrounding legal and regulatory system's capacity to punish falsehoods and make misrepresentation costly. In complex global supply chains, direct verifiability is structurally expensive and sometimes impossible. Traceability is hard, and data is highly fragmented, forcing downstream counterparties to rely heavily on institutional credibility instead. Without a functional institutional mechanism capable of imposing real financial consequences for misrepresentation, a disclosure is a well-formatted narrative. It is not a credible legal representation you can rationally rely on. To measure true credibility, we have to look past the standard and analyze the institutional bridge between a statement and a consequence. We call this unit of analysis the accountability channel. An operable channel breaks down into four elements. The first is V, for vehicles. This is the legal medium that anchors the claim, transforming a loose marketing PDF into a traceable statutory filing, listing rule, or binding contract. The second element is A, for actors. These are the specific institutions and human supervisors authorized to verify the claims. For this pillar to hold, these actors must operate under enforceable independence constraints. The third element is P, for pathways. These are the procedural routes for contestation. If challengers lack legal standing or the authority to demand document production, the pathway is blocked and challenge is impossible. Evidence access within these pathways is the absolute choke point for all ESG litigation and supply chain disputes. If you cannot access the underlying data to prove a misstatement, contestation is merely performance art. The final element is S, for sanctions. This is the consequence set. Crucially, we must distinguish between the distant threat of a delayed punitive fine and the immediate market-moving sting of a forced public restatement. These four elements are mutually conditioning. If any single pillar in this BAPS architecture collapses, the accountability channel snaps, rendering the underlying ESG disclosure legally useless for reliance. The VAPS structure outlines what exists on paper. To measure how the channel performs in reality, we use a diagnostic called the credibility triad. This chart shows the triad functioning as a deterrence equation. A user's willingness to rely on a claim increases with the perceived probability of activation and the expected magnitude of the consequence, divided by the time to resolution. The time to resolution, or tempo, heavily discounts the system's effectiveness. A delayed enforcement action is weak enforcement because by the time a penalty lands, the market has already priced in the false information. However, maximizing liability creates a severe counter-risk known as greenhushing. If a regime imposes draconian, zero-tolerance liability for uncertain, forward-looking climate projections, companies will rationally hide their transition plans and disclose only the legal minimum. To prevent greenhushing, the channel requires calibration devices. These are legal safe harbors that explicitly outline scope boundaries, penalizing bad faith without chilling good faith corporate transparency. The most credible accountability channels do not rely on maximum theoretical punishment. They rely on high visibility, high tempo corrective actions that force immediate market repricing. We operationalize this framework using the Accountability Channel Credibility Scorecard, or ACCS. The ACCS is a conservative 0 to 2-point diagnostic tool designed to measure the triad in practice using only publicly observable data. This scorecard shows a real-world stress test, comparing the listed issuer climate disclosure channels of Singapore against Thailand. Both jurisdictions utilize identical ISSB-aligned reporting templates. Singapore's exchange-centered model excels at tempo. The regulatory architecture utilizes rapid supervisory queries and immediate trading suspensions to force fast public corrections. Thailand's model embeds the standard deeper into statutory law, scoring perfectly on vehicle anchoring. However, it utilizes phased transition reliefs that temporarily lower procedural efficiency and scope clarity for external users. The ACCS framework reveals critical veto points. For example, a score of 0 in evidence access permanently caps the entire channel's credibility for high-stakes reliance, regardless of how strong the formal sanction powers appear on paper. Importing a global template into different domestic legal environments creates a transplant problem. Rule text and administrative implementation pull in different directions, meaning compliance officers must perform jurisdictional due diligence rather than simply checking if a standard was adopted. This architectural difference is an immediate threat to compliance managers navigating the rise of strict downstream regulatory regimes. These new laws convert upstream ESG claims directly into heavy corporate liability. Frameworks like the European Deforestation Regulation, or EUDR, and the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, or CSDDD, mandate that downstream buyers legally verify the claims of their furthest upstream suppliers. The EUDR and CSDDD are strict liability directives, requiring companies to ensure their value chains do not contribute to global deforestation or human rights violations. This mandate collides with the structural reality of tropical, land-use salient supply chains. These environments are spatially dispersed, digitally fragmented, and feature highly contested land tenure, making cheap verification impossible. The current failure state of this dynamic is audit saturation. Because downstream buyers distrust local accountability channels, they indiscriminately layer redundant, expensive private audits onto their upstream suppliers. Treating ESG compliance as a massive privatized paperwork exercise extracts value from developing nations while remaining legally brittle for the downstream buyer when the underlying data is challenged. The pragmatic alternative to this audit trap is channel-aware reliance. Supply chain lawyers must use the ACCS framework to surgically map the domestic accountability channel of their specific supplier. The goal is to locate the exact weakest link, which is usually evidence access. Instead of demanding blanket audits, practitioners must construct targeted, private microchannels through careful contract design to bridge those specific structural gaps. This microchannel engineering involves writing specific geolocation data sharing covenants, step-in rights for corrective action, and targeted whistleblower protections directly into procurement contracts. These private contractual bridges do not replace public ESG channels. They act as a precise substitute wherever a local government's legal pathways are thin, opaque, or too slow to matter. Standard reporting formats and semantic alignment are merely the starting line for corporate sustainability. In a high-stakes regulatory environment, ESG credibility is not something you can download via a global template. It is a vital piece of legal infrastructure that you must deliberately and aggressively engineer.